All right, welcome to another episode of Inside Hollywood with Vinny. Today, we're sitting down with the true architect of modern entertainment. If you ever consumed pop culture, celebrity news, reality TV, this is the man to thank right here. He is the co-founder of E Entertainment Television and author of a very fantastic book that I love, and just a man of visionary talent. Welcome to the show, Larry Namer. Larry, how are you?
Hey, good. All good. Thanks for having me here.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thanks for accommodating me and my audience. I know they're going to love you. So, I remember watching E when I was, my teenage years. Just one show after another. Talk Soup was religious to me. Every time it came on, I was there. And you always had some great ideas, but it wasn't always that way. And you have a great story to tell. You start out in good old Coney Island. You made your bones out there. Let's leave it in your own words, though. How did it all get started? And tell us about the segue into what you became.
Sure. I grew up in Coney Island, Brooklyn, and we figured out in later years we were poor, but everybody like us from the neighborhood was the same, so we never really knew it. But first kid in the family to ever go to college, graduated with a degree in economics. Very quickly found out there weren't a lot of jobs for people with degrees in economics, and I knew someone whose dad was in the Electrical Workers Union, IBEW. And I said, I want to do something kind of for a few months until I figure out what I do with my degree. And they said, well, we just organized this thing. It's called cable television. I don't know if anybody will ever pay for television, but here's the name and number of the shop steward. Just tell them the union sent you. So I did that, and they gave me a job in Manhattan. Then it was called Sterling Manhattan Cable TV. And they gave me a job as an assistant underground splicer for $90 a week. And my job was to go under the streets of Manhattan every day and put the wires together. It was a dirty job, needless to say. But I very quickly I went from assistant splicer to a splicer to a construction worker to an installer to a serviceman. So I quickly went up the ranks on the operations technical side. And and then what happened was the company ended up getting bought by Time Incorporated when Time was just a magazine company. And they really wanted to move from being a publishing company to being a media company. And they had a 10-year plan to do that. And so they were having their first union negotiation for a contract with the cable workers. And the guy from the union was like, hey, kid, you know how to read and write. We're going to put you on the negotiating committee. I said, okay, I don't know anything about union stuff, but yeah, I can do that. And so I was 23 years old, and I was on negotiating against, all the MBAs from Harvard and Yale and Stanford and stuff. And the contract turned out very well. And the union guy said to me, hey, kid, we love that you were on it and you really helped us out. And they made me the vice chairman of the cable TV workers. So I was 23 years old, and here I am, a union official. And then Time Inc. put one of their golden boys in as president of Manhattan Cable because they kind of had him destined to be bigger. And actually, he turned out to be the chairman of Time Warner after the merger. And, when he was there, he just found that it was easy for him to talk to me and figure out what it is those guys do when they go under the streets every day. And eventually, he convinced me to go into management. So 25, I became the director of operations of the biggest cable company in the country, with 300 and something people reporting to me. But then what happened was all the big cities began to realize that cable TV was more than just a way to get good reception, because that's what it was originally. And they all wanted cable, but they wanted the cable to go underground. They didn't want it on unsightly telephone poles, within big cities. So a Canadian company won the franchise for Los Angeles, and they had to build underground, and they needed someone who knew how to build underground. So at that time, I just turned 30, so they recruited me to come out to LA to be the vice president, general manager of Valley Cable. That point, it was going to be the biggest two-way interactive cable system in the country. And so I ended up doing that, after a lot of weird negotiating and stuff, because I really didn't want to leave New York. So I just demanded all kinds of crazy things, figuring they'll never say yes, including at that point, I don't know if you remember Liberace, but he had moved from LA to Las Vegas in his house with a piano-shaped swimming pool which was on the front, the opening of Entertainment Tonight. I said, well, you got to rent that house for me. And they just thought I was crazy. But 2 weeks later, they called and said, okay, come out. And so I did that. So, you're a Brooklyn kid and you're out in LA and everybody's going to parties and premieres and all this stuff. And I called the studios and they were like, listen, we don't know what this cable TV is. And you sound like a utility. You're like the phone company. So we're not going to put you on our guest list. I said, fine. And then when I met someone from Universal Marketing and I said, I don't understand. The most effective vehicle you have for marketing a movie is the movie trailer. But the only time I ever see a movie trailer is when I'm already in the movies. I said, wouldn't you want me to see that when I'm at home? And he said, yeah, but it's too expensive. We can't afford to buy TV for those. I said, okay, tell you what, you give me those movie trailers. I'll put them on TV for free. And you put me on a list for the parties and premieres. And he said, yeah, sure, if you'll do that. So they did that. And then when we started doing audience surveys, what's your favorite channel? I love MTV. I love CNN. I love that trailer channel. And I went, that's really crazy. I'm getting the best 2 minutes of a $50 million movie for free. And, people are loving it. And then the company I work for was Canadian. They sold out and moved back to Canada. And they wanted me to go to Toronto. And I'm like, whoa, I didn't go from New York to LA to go to Toronto. So me and my friend Alan just started kicking around ideas. And, it was a time where MTV was actually showing music videos. And, we just said, wait a second, if they could stand a host in front of a green screen and go, Madonna has a new video, I said, we could stand a host in front of a green screen and go, Schwarzenegger has a new movie. So, we thought we were really smart. We wrote a business plan. But, everybody said, it's a nice idea, but people don't start TV networks. It's never been done, and it'll never be done. You got to be Time Warner or you got to be Disney or Paramount and stuff. So it took us 3.5 years to raise a little bit of money. At that time, the going rate to start a TV network was around $100 million. And after 3.5 years, we realized nobody was giving us that money. So we found a guy on Wall Street who said, I really love this and I could give you $2.5 million. And we said, I can't even buy the cameras for $2.5 million. And he said, well, that's all I can sign for. Well, we took it. And I had a friend who was teaching radio, television, film at University of Texas in Austin. And I called him up, said, do you have any kids that need intern jobs for the summer? And he said, yeah, we had a lot of trouble placing. So people don't realize today, because he's a monster, we're in 142 countries and the valuation is up above 10 billion. But he started with 11 employees and 31 interns.
It's amazing. And, I was listening to some other podcasts you're on, and it's just crazy because it just seems like, and this is kind of consistent with a lot of people I interviewed too that became successful. Is like, no matter what you try to do, it's like destiny's just pushing you and you have no way but to get there as long as you keep your head on straight. And that sounds exactly what happened to you. I mean, the Liberace story is pretty hysterical.
Yeah.
Now, I remember cable hitting Philly in about early 80s, mid 80s. I think we got it in 85. And it was back then, it was like half of Broad Street, which is our like a main drag there. Like half of the city got it before we did. And then if you were part, that was like the rich part of town. And back then we had Greater Media Cable, which then was bought out by the Roberts family, who I
Comcast.
came to. Yeah, the Comcast, exactly. And I knew Ralph Roberts Sr. and his wife Suzanne, great people, and they just blew up. And of course, and it's funny to hear you say it too, because people probably didn't believe anything in cable. I thought, this was a nonsense. But I'm old enough to remember we had like 3 channels, black and white TVs with the knob that always fell off. And it's amazing how far it's come. So, there you go. You're going from doing, union grievances to being in LA. Your head probably exploded. The dopamine levels probably shot up. And the weather itself is enough to want to make you stay. You found somebody, but you were smart enough to say, well, we'll just take the 2.5 million. Actually, why don't you tell the one story where you snuck into, was it the Oscars that you actually snuck in and got interviews?
Yeah, we started and, we were kind of going along. And again, 11 employees, 31 interns. And, we didn't even have professional equipment. We bought like used cameras that we used for sales training for some corporation. And we applied for credentials to cover the Oscars. And we got rejected. And they were like really nasty to us. They went, you're like some dumb little cable network. And no, we're not giving you credentials. So, not realizing that you really can't do it and you can get arrested. We literally climbed over the fence. We snuck in. We're on the red carpet, probably for like 30 minutes before they caught us and threw us out. And it really was a turning point because, here we are with our, kind of secondhand equipment. So everything wasn't polished like you'd find on ABC, NBC, CBS. And, our interests, because we didn't come out of the Hollywood world, were very different. I mean, everybody was doing, so Tom Cruise, tell us about your next movie. And we were like, whoa, Tom, those are great shoes. Where'd you get those? And they like, what are you doing with the kids on the weekend? And, so we were very different. And then people started going, wow, that was really amazing. We thought we were watching something we're not supposed to because it looked so pirate. I mean, little did they know that we had climbed over the fence and, we did that. But that kind of, started the ball rolling where people say, would go to work the next day and go, wow, did you watch, last night? They had Tom Cruise talking about his marriage and, all kinds of stuff that they never thought they would see. So that was really a turning point. And then, when we started really getting a little traction, we said, okay, now we could do some like real 30-minute TV shows. So the first one we came up with was, I went to the crew and said, hey, I want to do a TV show that makes fun of TV shows. And they were like, you can't do that. I mean, that's ridiculous. And I said, no, I don't know why it's ridiculous. So, I mean, we started that. I mean, Greg Kinnear was the first host, and the show was called Talk Soup. And, from We Can't Do That show lasted 26 years.
It's incredible. And I referenced that earlier, Talk Soup. And, it was just something completely different because, you had all those bland TV shows that just
Yeah.
covered the very, again, bland news. But it really stepped out the boundaries. There was a lot of comedic elements to it, and it was hysterical. I don't know if I've ever heard you address this in any interviews, but so you're a new kid on the block, you and your partner. I'm sure you feel alienated. I'm sure a lot of the Hollywood snobs are, not even giving you any kind of time of the day until you start to get success. So, at what point did you realize, all right, now I'm having, breakfast, lunch at the Polo Lounge. Now I'm accepted. When did that come?
I don't know if it ever really came. I mean, we're always a little bit of an outlier, and we like that. We like being that, quite honestly, because as long as we weren't part of the mainstream, we could do whatever we want without getting any backlash, because nobody wanted to talk to us anyway. But one of the ones that really turned things around for us in Hollywood, it was interesting because here Hollywood is kind of the center of the entertainment world, but yet there were no TV stations that were headquartered in Hollywood. And we were the first one to actually have a cable network headquartered in Hollywood. So, the Hollywood Chamber of Commerce and all those people loved us because, they didn't have to go beg Fox or NBC or whatever for coverage of the Hollywood Walk of Fame or whatever they were doing. But, the one that really stands out, there was an actor, he's gone now, who's in The Odd Couple, Jack Lemmon. And Jack was known for, I mean, he was a great actor in some of the most amazing movies, but he was known for not really liking to do media interviews and stuff and was very reluctant to do them. And it was very rare that you could get him to come and talk about his project or next project. And it was kind of known throughout Hollywood that Jack doesn't do this. And, so we're talking to the manager, and he said, no, we're not going to do an interview. No, Jack doesn't like doing that, and he's not doing it. So I, kidding around, I said, well, what does Jack like to do? And he goes, he likes his private life. He loves to play the piano and, just be with family and friends. I said, okay, tell you what. I said, I'll put a piano on the set. Jack could come in and play the piano for 1 hour. Nobody will talk to him or ask him a question. And the manager just looked at me and goes, what? I go, he can play the piano for an hour. Nobody will talk to him. He goes, would you guarantee that? I said, yeah. I said, if anybody asked Jack a question, Jack could get up and walk out. He goes, well, Jack may do that. Anyway, so Jack did it. We put a piano on the set. And what happened was, for about the first half hour, Jack was just playing the piano and like looking around very wary, going, these guys can't be serious that nobody's going to talk to me. But nobody would talk to him because I warned everybody. I said, don't say a word to him. And after about a half an hour, he just got really comfortable and turned to the camera and started talking about all the stuff that people were asking him for years that he would never answer. And when that interview went on, everybody in town was like, my God, how did you get Jack to do that? And literally, that's when every manager was calling us going, hey, we have these new guys. They're called the Wayans brothers and stuff. They would love to host. And I go, yeah, send them in. And then There's this gal named Paula Abdul who trains cheerleaders, but she's got a new album coming out. She'd like to host. Yeah, send her in. So that kind of really sent us into the stratosphere.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. As you were talking, I was trying to figure out the angle because I assumed that he eventually did give you an interview, but I couldn't see how he did that. So that's pretty brilliant. That's really amazing. And those old time actors were great too, man. I really miss the old sort of, and that's not really old Hollywood, but that's older than we are now anyway.
Yeah.
So when you did eventually get to a certain point where you feel like now you're established, now you're respected for the most part, right? There's always going to be those envious elements, but did you then get to a point where you wanted to just expand, keep growing, keep pretty much, using your philosophy that got you there to start taking on other and bigger and better projects?
No, I mean, then, it was all about growing we started out, the name of the company was Movie Time. And when we decided we were going to be bigger than just about the movies and be about all the world of entertainment, we changed the name to E. And but we in the first year, I mean, after 3.5 years of not raising 10 cents, in the first year we managed to expand to 14 other countries. I mean, now he's in 142 countries, and so we just looked at growth in terms of international distribution, as well as starting to do more original programming. We went from Talk Soup to Howard Stern to E Hollywood True Story to Wild on E to eventually now you go to Lady Years, you go to Kardashians. So it was really about just pushing the boundaries.
You mentioned Howard, you mentioned the Kardashians, which I would venture to say you're responsible, really, in a large part, to launching their success. And I don't want to be, I braggadocious for you, but I think that's the true story, isn't it?
Yeah, well, and I always tell people, I mean, we get a lot of credit for that, but quite honestly, the real credit belongs to the mom. I mean, because the mom really orchestrated the success of those girls. We provided the platform. We gave them the platform that nobody else would. So yes, we had a lot to do with it. But it was Chris, and Bruce Jenner. They were the ones who developed the girls into the great marketers that they became.
Since you're a man on the inside, I'm sure a lot of the audience would be curious about this. Can you just take anyone off the street, off Sunset Boulevard, make them a star? Or do they have to have the discipline? There's got to be a certain amount of talent. There's got to be something for them to, whether it's reality, whether it's movies, whether it's TV. How does that work? How does the system really work? Or does it work like that at all?
No, it's I probably get 10 people a week who pitch me like, I want to be a TV host. I want to be a TV host. And maybe once a year, I come up with somebody who has maybe the possibility of pulling it off. But I'm working with a gal now who I found about a year ago named Natasha Graziano, who's now a big motivational speaker. She does TED Talks and podcasts and all that stuff. But, number one, you have to have the personality to do it. Then you need to have the look that would be accepted. It doesn't mean beautiful. It just means a look that could work, to a wide audience. But typically what shakes a lot of people out is the work ethic, because people don't understand. They think it's all glamour. And, I explain to people after they pitch, I go, and I'm trying to be nice. I go, yeah, you got it. And so now let me make sure you understand. If we get you a daytime talk show, you're going to be in hair and makeup from 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. From 5 a.m. to 11 a.m., you're going to be shooting. You're going to go home, you're going to have lunch, you're going to go to sleep, and you'll do it 50 weeks a year. And they're like, no, I spend the summers in the Hamptons. I can't do. Tell the network we can only do 30. I go, no, that's not the way it works. Work ethic shakes people out. With Natasha, it was really interesting because, again, I always try and push people to walk away. I would call her up at 3 o'clock in the morning, just figure I could lose her that way. And she would stay on the phone with me for 2 hours and stuff. And I went, you know what? I can't shake this one loose. She's got the look, she's got the personality, and she's got the work ethic. So we've actually developed a new show called Natasha After Dark, which we're going to take out this summer as a nighttime talk show, because I can't stop her from using the F word, so we can't do daytime.
Those Italians, boy. I'm also a fan of Natasha's while I follow her, and I'm a big fan of yours. I followed you, and I have to thank my dear mutual friend of ours, Shelly Stelmack, who's
Yeah.
amazing, for kind of giving me an introduction to you as far as the, sharing your wonderful site. And again, anybody's watching this, any of my people, please make sure that you're following Larry on Instagram, on all social networks, and please support him as well. That going back to, and I like that sort of criteria. You have to put them through the fires to see if what they're made of. And hard work, there is never a replacement for hard work. Definitely understand that. That's also one of my main things in life is you have to work hard if you want to get anywhere.
Yeah.
I noticed though, a lot of people that get into Hollywood, whether they're a host, whether they're a movie star, whether they're an actor, singer, whatever the case may be, burnout happens. A lot of these people, unfortunately, turn to drugs, different things. It really seems like it's a really hard thing to try to manage talent with all these different variables. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's very hard because, most of them get a swelled head. We were very fortunate at I mean, and we turned out a lot of people from, all the people that hosted Talk Soup. I mean, from Greg Kinnear to, Joel McHale and, Howard Stern and stuff like that. But we were very strict with this thing that everybody who works in the company is the same. So, we treated Howard like, not a star. The engineer was treated the same way and stuff. So we had this very level playing field there. So we really didn't have it there. But, I see in Hollywood now, people just get a swelled head and they think they're above everything else. And then they burn out. And then a lot of people don't realize that, once you reach a certain level of stardom, you've lost your privacy. You can't go to a restaurant. You can't. I mean, even for me today, and I stayed way under the radar for many years. But then with COVID, I kind of started doing more stuff and becoming more visible. I go to Soho House or something to meet someone for lunch, and people begin to recognize me now, and they're going, "Oh my God, I just wrote a script. Could you do me a favor and take my script and give me script notes?" And I'm too nice. I'm like, okay, yeah, and stuff. So I just avoid places like that. It's literally now in Hollywood. New York is different. New York, nobody knows who I am, but in Hollywood, I go someplace. I mean, I'm a single guy. I mean, I go to a restaurant or a club and I get hit on by a pretty 20-something actress. My first reaction was, "Whoa, I look good today." And I go, "Wait a second." Somebody elbowed her and said, "Hey, that's the guy for me." And you quickly come back down to earth. It's so managing celebrity is a hard thing. I mean, I've got it to a very minor degree, but you look at people who are like TV stars and movie stars and music stars. That's it. They've given up their privacy literally for life.
Well, and that's yeah, it comes with territory. I don't think people really understand what that means, the vulnerability aspect of that, until you're really there. So I know a lot of people they like to condemn people that are celebrities because how come they don't want to be in the public eye? And there is a to a degree there has to be boundaries. I mean,
Yeah.
after all, people do love their privacy. How was it working with Howard Stern? What could you say about him? I would imagine he's
A very hard worker, consummate professional. I mean, Howard was just a pro. I mean, there was really nothing you could say. But I mean, once in a while, you try and tone him down a little, and then, but then, you know what? You got to let Howard be Howard. So you just learn to just sometimes when things would come out of his mouth, let's cringe and close your eyes and hope the FCC is not watching you. But absolute pro. There's nothing bad you could say. I mean, the people don't realize when we first looked at that show, and I talked to the crew and I said, "Hey, I want to put cameras in this guy's radio studio." They went, "Larry, you're out of your mind. Radio's dead 40 years." And I go, "You know what? You don't realize there used to be an old sitcom in the U.S. called WKRP in Cincinnati." I said, "This is the reality TV version of KRP in Cincinnati. It's an ensemble comedy, class cast in a radio station." And, Howard did well.
he was basically the modern day Johnny Fever.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, that was a great sitcom too. Just want to real quick. I want to show everybody the book. Sorry if the green screen's interrupted here. But this is a fantastic book here. It's called Script: Never Followed a Crowd by Larry Namer. You got to encourage everybody to pick that up. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but we got a couple things I want to hit before you do leave. Let's talk about what's going on now. What are you excited about besides Mitz Graziano, who's fantastic? But what are we doing now?
Well, I do a lot of stuff in China. I have a company in China, headquartered in Beijing, and we do everything from TV, film, internet content, live events, concerts, and all in Chinese. and that's what's allowed us to function well in the market. Is we localized everything. We do it specifically for Chinese audience and who live in China. And but I'm very much into artificial intelligence. So doing a lot of stuff. As a matter of fact, we just launched Natasha. It's digital Natasha. We built a digital twin. She life coaches people and gets a lot of money, thousands of dollars from celebrities to be their life coach. But today, with a lot of mental health crisis and stuff like that, we said, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could actually provide the kind of services she does, motivational, inspirational guidance at very low cost? So we created a digital twin. So you could actually go to natashagraziano.com and sign up for a digital twin. And last year we got into podcasting, not with me on air. I never want to be in front of the camera, but a lot of people I know, keep coming to me. They go, Larry, we don't really have a voice in media. Could you help us do something? And so last year we started something. A very good friend of mine, actress Jenny Lee Harrison, who was the replacement for Suzanne Summers on Three's Company, and then she was Dallas for 5 years. She was all about, women don't have a comfortable place to meet and talk. So we created a show called Stall Talk, which is on YouTube and Roku and all the others and stuff, where it's just, it's about the camaraderie that I think women share that us guys don't get. I mean, we'll talk to each other about sports, we'll talk about business, but we don't talk about our feelings or the latest in MAC Cosmetics. So doing that, and that's been up for a year now, so we've got over 30 episodes done. And then next month we have a new one called The Immigrant, which is a podcast in conjunction with The Immigrant magazine. And it's really meant to tell positive stories about legal immigrants, just to remind people that we're basically a country that was built on waves of immigrants, because we seem to have lost that narrative. And now people are confusing immigration with illegal immigration, and they're two very different things. I mean, if we didn't have the Italian immigration, we wouldn't have the Brooklyn Bridge, and we wouldn't have the Empire State Building. Without the Chinese and the Irish building the railroads, just on and on. So we're doing that, and and that's kind of what's keeping us going. We do a lot of stuff now with social impact. So we create series for the streamers. So we did financial wellness for millennials, because kids don't really learn life skills in school anymore. We just finished one called Conscious Parenting, about trying to be a parent in today's world. And then with Natasha, we're doing this late night talk show called Natasha After Dark. So that's keeping us busy.
What do we think about the direction? Maybe a bit controversial, but I got to ask you. What do you think? What do you make of the direction of Hollywood now? What do you think the future is going to look like? Which are you? What are some of the? Are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic? What do you think about Hollywood in general, as far as the entertainment world?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think people keep confusing with Hollywood as a geographic place. Well, 100 years ago, you had to come to Hollywood if you wanted to make visual entertainment. Of course, you needed big sound stages and you needed expensive equipment. Now with technology, to me, Hollywood it's a measure of creativity, it's a measure of quality, but it's not the geographic place you have to be. I could take my iPhone and go to any place in the world and make a movie. So that's number one. Then you have technology, AI, and to me, I love AI. I mean, when I got involved in the business and I had to write a script, I had a typewriter and a little bottle of whiteout, and it would take me 3 months to write a script, and I'd be whiting it out, and by the time you finish, it looked like garbage. And then word processing and laptops came along, and what used to take me 3 months would now take me 5 days. Now, doing the research for a new project, the budgets, the PowerPoint presentations, etc., it takes me 2 hours. And, I said, as long as I get paid the same amount for that work, that whether it takes me 3 hours or 5 days, I got to be thrilled with that. I mean, I could spend time with my little grandkid. I could learn how to speak Spanish. I could go on a cruise. I could reclaim time, which is human beings. We all have a limited amount of time on this planet. There's nothing more valuable than our time. And so I think you'll see AI, yes, it's going to wipe out a lot of mundane jobs, but it's also going to put a tool in the hands of creative people where anybody on the planet who's got a creative bone in their body is going to be able to create content that draws an audience and is financially sustainable and stuff. You're not going to see a lot of the $300 million movies an increase, but you're going to see a lot of stuff in that lower level. That's interesting. I mean, just I love TikTok and Instagram and stuff like that, and it's just unleashed a lot of creative people. So then you'll see that. And then the other thing that's really happening in Hollywood now, and it's everybody thinks they invented it here, but it really started in China in 2013, which are called microdramas, which are these little miniature serialized dramas and stuff. And people think they invented it, and I'm going, you know what? I've been in China for a long time, and they've been doing it in China for quite a while. But the form is no different than soap operas. I mean, soap operas are literally written in 2-minute story arcs where there's always a cliffhanger that leads you into the next segment. It's just the same thing, just using different technology. And the fact people want to watch it on their cell phone, hey, great. I don't care where people watch my stuff as long as they watch it.
Absolutely. And it's funny you bring that up because I'm talking to people literally almost every day in New York City, in Jersey, in Philly, in LA, which is where most of my audience is watching from. And that's all we're talking about because I guess you could say amateur filmmaker. I got some awards, but I did some shorts and some features, and I'm really starting to really focus my attention now on these mini dramas or serial or verticals as they're called. It's a different animal. It's not just, a lot of people say, well, it's like, you shoot 60 minutes, you chop it up. It's a different animal. And you're right. Everything now is just like I'm on my iPhone now speaking to you. Everything is in our hands. That's where the attention's at.
Yeah, it's if you look at what the genre that's out there, I call it romance novels on steroids. I mean, which is just the first wave in the vertical drama world. It's I married the secret billionaire, and I had the aliens baby, and that stuff. But it'll expand into other genres, just like reality did. Reality started, you had things like that were more contests, and now it expanded to all kinds of things. With verticals, you'll see the same thing. I mean, if I had to guess, the next one's going to be sci-fi and horror, but it's going to be more than, like I said, these romance novels.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. Well, okay, just to end things up, can you give the audience maybe some, in your own experience and in your philosophy, what are like maybe the three most important things to have in order to be successful in whatever career you're pursuing? What are those three fundamental things you need?
Well, I mean, number one is don't take yourself too seriously. Don't listen to what people say about you, good or bad. It's how do you feel about yourself and stuff. That's why I manage to stay pretty level. When people write stuff about me, good or bad, I'm like, yeah, whatever. Who cares? But then the one that I find the most interesting, where people keep getting caught up in this, with everybody telling kids today, follow your passion. And I'm going, that's the worst thing in the world you can do. Most of the time, your passion really is your hobby and stuff. And, again, realities of life. We all have to pay the rent. We got to buy food. We got to feed the kids, put them through school and stuff. So I always tell people, I go, you know what? Find something you're good at, work your butt off and become great at it. And then it's going to provide you the financial wherewithal on the weekends to follow your hobbies.
Great advice. And here you go. They thought you were crazy about cable TV. They thought you were crazy about making your own TV channel and creating your own sort of media company. And here you are. And again, your words really ring true to me even before I even met you. Or there was something that I thought was fascinating, that you didn't listen to anybody else. You just did what you felt in your gut was the right thing to do. And it's provided you with the life that you have now. So I give you a lot of credit. It's really amazing.
Yeah. And I guess, the third thing is, and I do this. I wake up in the morning, I have 10 new ideas. By the time I go to sleep, I realize most of them were pretty dopey. Is to just be true to yourself and honest with yourself and self assess. Don't hang on to stuff just because your ego tells you, I got to do it, I got to stick with it. There's a lot of stuff I go after, I go, what sounded like a good idea. Now I realize it's not. What's next? And just move on. Don't waste your time.
This was a good idea. That was a little sugar. Cut out, just chalk it up. The stuff that you're not really going to be good at, or it's not very interesting. Just chalk it up and focus on what you're good at.
Yep.
All right, great. Well, Larry, thank you so much for joining us. You've been very generous with your time and with your advice, and I really do appreciate it. Again, everyone who's watching, I please ask you to pick up this book. Amazing. This is off script, never follow crowd, which Larry Namer has made a lifetime doing, and very successfully, I might say too. So thank you again. Our guest has been the amazing man behind E! Entertainment, Larry Namer. Thanks again, folks. We'll see you again real soon.
All righty. Take care.